You're on.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our work session of Las Cruces City Council. Today is Friday, June 12th, 2020. It's approximately 9:30 a.m. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we have one item on the agenda. Just double check we don't have a pet of the week. One item on the agenda, COVID-19 update. We're going to have three presenters. First one's going to be Natalie Green, followed by Deputy Chief Jason Smith, and then also joining us is Colin Combs from our Emergency Operations Center. So Natalie, you ready to take it away?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Natalie Green with Community Development. So again, the presentation before you is an update on the funding that council has provided for COVID-19 emergency response. The first update I have for you is the Community Foundation of Southern New Mexico. Overall, they spent all of their funding. In addition to our $150,000, they also they spent a total of $450,000. City funds assisted. I apologize. Your guys' faces are right in the middle of my presentation and I can't see.
Just hit escape, Natalie, and it should. Oh no, then it won't go to full. No, sorry.
So they assisted approximately 489 individuals with city funding, which was a total of 1,573. A lot of the funding went to food service workers, hair salon workers, daycare, employees that worked at daycare facilities, substitute teachers, hotels, automobile. It's going to be a lot of those industries that were heavily impacted by the shutdown. Any denials were because they were either duplicates or fraudulent applications. It was a very small percentage, but they were there. There is a continued need, so they are referring to the other agencies that still have funding, and they, through this process, determined there is a gap of service for those individuals who lack computers or have limited English proficiency, so that's something they're working on overall outside of this process. One thing they did ask me to emphasize is for us to consider options down the road when we're looking at recovery. So not necessarily now during this time, but a few months from now, what that recovery process looks like. The next agency is Community Action Agency. Council awarded them $225,000. So far, they've processed 300 requests for assistance. They've helped 138 of those households. They had 69 applications that they were still processing, and approximately 50 were non-responsive. So this was probably a midweek update. They've spent more since then, but it's about $80,000, and they're still working to expend those funds. We're hoping that they'll be able to expend by the end of the fiscal year, but they may need an extension into the next fiscal year. They are using that to assist with rent, mortgage, utility payments, car payments, general assistance. Casa de Peregrinos, they saw over 700 new clients. So these are not their regular clients that they see month after month. These were new households that they've never ever seen before. They assisted in May 249 individuals with utility vouchers, and they've distributed almost 300,000 pounds of food. And then their expenses, again, they're seeing an increase in food costs. As we all know, a lot of their food was coming from the food rescue program. So that was coming from stores that have food that they can't sell or is near the expiration date that they give to Casa de Peregrinos. And with the food shortages in the stores, they're not seeing that food rescue come in. Families and youth, council awarded them $300,000, and they're using it across 3 different programs. El Crucero, which has 43 residents, and it's a permanent supportive housing program near the Mesilla Valley Community Hope campus. My Friend's Place is the youth shelter, so they have 9 runaway youth or homeless youth staying in the shelter. They've done 4, I apologize, this number is in the wrong spot, but through the Mayor's Meals programs, they've done 48,000 meals in the month, I believe that's the month, I'm not sure what this is. I apologize. But they've done 4,000 breakfasts. Oh, I think that all those numbers add up together. So it's a total for the Mayor's Meal and the summer food program. So they did 31,000 lunches. They've also started their dinner service program. So they've done 11,000 dinners starting since March 31st. And they've ended their separate breakfast program. So now as part of their lunch, they're serving breakfast and lunch in a common meal bag.
Excuse me, Natalie, those 3 numbers do add up to 48,354.
Thank you. They also, as part of the Mayor's Meal Initiative, they are working through a restaurant relief program. So they have provided about 14,000 vouchers, or will be providing 14,000 meal vouchers. And that helps food insecure households that are over the age of 18. So the summer and the dinner meals can help those under the age of 18. This can help individuals above the age of 18. So the restaurants they put out an RFP for local restaurants. The restaurants that were awarded vouchers are the Aim Fit Meals, Andales, Jake's Cafe, Jim Bob's Cafe, La Posta, Lorenzo's, Mateo's, Ruby Tuesdays, and the Game 1 and 2. Those vouchers are available through many of our partners in the community. So if someone is looking for a meal voucher, they can contact El Crucero, Comprehensive Community Support, Community Action Agency, Community of Hope, some of the community schools. So there's quite a few locations to get a meal voucher, and we'll make sure this is up on our website. So not only council can access this, but members of the public can access this. Community of Hope was awarded $74,000. They've expended about 33,000 of that and assisted 41 households. So over the last month or so, they've seen 44 first-time clients. So that's clients that have never accessed their services. And all across their programs, they're currently housing over 242 households. And they did create their online application, so they've seen an increase in assistance requests. La Casa, they were able to open their shelter back up with the new governor's orders. So they have 24 families in shelters. They still have 15 families in hotels. And they've had some new families enter transitional housing programs. And they have 48 families that are, they're not in shelter, but they're receiving services outside. They've served over 3,000 meals to their residents. Crucifix Creatives Council awarded them approximately $21,000. They've created 5,000 either masks or face shields, and they are distributing those to different departments and members of the public and many of the medical facilities. And we'll have a more comprehensive update if council wants to know where those masks are going on the website. Doniana Communities United, they were able to fill the position to do the Los Amigos program. So they've matched 20 pairs so far, and they continue to coordinate with La Clínica de Familia, MMC, and Mountain View to identify vulnerable clients that would benefit from the program. La Piñon, last month they saw 61 children for forensic interviews. They saw 11 adults for sexual assault exams, and they had 4 deferred cases for child abuse exams. Just a general update from them. They're not seeing an increase or a decrease necessarily, but they are seeing what they're calling a change in abuse patterns. So they're seeing more chronic sexual abuse cases involving children. And what they mean by a change in abuse is they've seen more intimate partner violence and some what they call pretty horrific cases. So they just want to thank the city for our continued support. And they also want to thank their responding partners, so law enforcement, CYFD, for their continued work, again, on these difficult cases. Catholic Charities, they've assisted 49 individuals and distributed almost $30,000 in direct assistance. And again, they're using that for utilities, rent, mortgage payments, food assistance. They were able to help 4 homeless high school students last month. Habitat for Humanity, their contract was executed. They've hired their local contractors, so construction is ongoing. And we expect the homes will be completed by the end of the month and they'll be closing on time. The Veterans Treatment Court, their contract was pending. I got that contract back signed. So they are purchasing electronic equipment for telehealth services to continue their video court sessions for the clients that are in the Veterans Treatment Court. So they're able to maintain their supervision and provide that video interaction so they can continue their path to their path, so they can comply with their court standards and the policies of the program. So they're doing their social groups, their treatment groups. So the fire department, we awarded $40,000 for PPE. So again, fire department remains the single point of ordering. So any city departments that need PPE should be contacting them. They were able to stock all the community interacting departments, and they've bought gloves, masks, sanitizer wipes, and hand sanitizer. So they're continuing to distribute those items. Sanitation kits, all the supplies have arrived. They've prepared or are continuing to prepare those kits. And again, this was I made this slide midweek, but they're probably up to 1,000 distributed to Community of Hope, and they're working on the second batch for senior programs. As part of this initiative, the fire also bought these cotton masks to distribute to the general public. So we are distributing those through Quality of Life, utilities, parks. We have some here at the front desk. The fire department and I believe police already had theirs. I'll let Chief correct me on that. And then community development also has masks. So if there are members of the public that don't have access to masks, we do have, again, these cotton masks available. Economic development, they have completed the flash assessment and that was presented to council, and someone from economic development is here to answer any questions regarding this. They are also working on their technical assistance, so they were finalizing the contract and are beginning to issue a PO on that process. The Utility Assistance Fund, they have exhausted their fiscal year 20 funding and they are beginning to spend their emergency COVID funding. So they've assisted almost 300 individuals and 40 businesses. And they have spent about 56,000 of that 125,000. And then I will stand for discussion.
Thanks, Natalie. Any questions of Natalie on these appropriations? Councilor Beta-Stubbe?
Thank you, and thank you, Natalie, for showing all this. I had a quick question. If we could go back to the slide that had the FYI restaurant vouchers. And when looking at those, how many RFPs did we end up receiving from different restaurants?
Let me see if I have that number. So in the update they provided me, I do not see where they told me how many RFPs they received.
Okay. That would be a number I'd like to know more about that RFP process. Also with the masking as well. Maybe that's something that we could go over later, get something set up, but I would like to learn more about that. And I'd like to know how many of our restaurants did apply for that process. I also noticed we do have, is Ruby Tuesdays a locally owned franchise or?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Beto-Stuvi, I will find out for you.
Okay, thank you. I just, as I'm new to this process, I am starting to see very similar names pop up consistently in certain areas, and it is something I'm very excited. I want us to be able to help out as many businesses as possible, but it's just it's a very small list for as many as we have. How many openings did we have for that RFP? What was the mechanism to decide just choosing these?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Beto-Stuvi, so FYI advertised, they had a specific process where they asked restaurants to give them information on essentially what was a $10 meal. So they submitted those to them, but I would have to get more specific information from FYI. So I can reach out to them, ask them that, and I will work through management to get you a response.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then for the second one, if we could go to the slide with the La Piñon numbers, please. Thank you. And there we go. If you wouldn't mind, they had 61 of the forensic interviews. What was that date range for that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Beto-Stuvi, that was just in the month of May.
Just in the month of May, okay.
And in fact, all of these numbers were just for the month of May, so.
Okay, thank you. This is a very difficult situation, and I do applaud our La Piñon and the work that they do. I know it's very hard for them as well to hear all those. So thank you. Those are the only questions I have for now.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Pro Tem Gondara, and then Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Natalie, for your presentation, and thank you to the staff that put this together. And I know it's an enormous amount of work to put this together and to manage it. And so I'm hoping I think Councilor Beto-Stuvi alluding to the question about will we get an overall number, a final report where you're able to speak to the numbers of children and families that each of these organizations have been able to help.
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Gondara, so I suspect that we'll get final reports on total numbers closer to the end of the fiscal year when they've expended most of their funding, if not all of their funding. So these numbers do change daily. And so some of the agencies are billing weekly, some of them are billing monthly or every other month. So we won't have a full grasp of the picture, but we'll ensure that we get you a final report on all of these numbers as those come in. And again, we are updating the website with accomplishments weekly.
Yes, I'm aware. I see that. So the other, I thought that we were in agreement as a council that as we work through these food vouchers, that we were very specific about making sure that we had local businesses, especially the mom and pop, restaurants that we can help. So I'm hoping that you, in terms of Ruby Tuesday, I don't know if they're locally owned, but that would be something that I would be interested in. And the other piece and the other question is the Community of Hope slide. Can you move to that one, Natalie? Okay. I would be interested in finding out how many of these households are children and families, are individuals. Some digging in more with the demographics would be helpful to me. Those are, when you talk about 44 first-time clients and 242 currently in housing programs, those are astonishing numbers to me, especially during COVID. And I think those are things that I like to understand a little more, because I'm afraid that as we move through these months, that we might see some increases with folks that aren't able to pay rent, unable to pay mortgages, those kinds of things. And we certainly don't want people to find themselves homeless. And so if we could get a little more demographics as it relates to that, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Gondeta, I will get that information. And to previously answer Councilor Beta-Stubbe, I pulled up the RFP. So the qualifications were that they must be locally owned and operated. So I'm going to say that Ruby Tuesdays was locally owned or operated in order to get this funding. The other qualifications was that they had to be a brick or mortar and operated at a full service restaurant. They had to be open for at least 5 days a week. And they preferred delivery services, but it was not required.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I know this was a huge lift. I know that a lot of our organizations or agencies are really working hard to expend this money. So I know that maybe some of them might need an extension, and I hope that we're able to give that we're flexible enough to agree to move into the new fiscal year, having them assist folks accordingly. So thank you. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Beta-Stubbe, did you guys see the note from Rochelle? Okay, looks like that Ruby Tuesday is a locally owned franchise, so so that's good. Councilor Vasquez?
The owner went to NMSU, so that's cool.
That's good.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for those wonderful questions, Councilors Beta-Stubbe and Gandara. Mayor Pro Tem Gandara had some similar questions, in particular about the effectiveness of the restaurant vouchers. Just given the amount of restaurants potentially that needed the help, seems like a pretty small group to pick from in terms of the impact that we could have. Not saying that there's any issues on the part of staff. I just think, however we can have more of an impact using those funds or rework the program in the future so that it has a little bit more reach across the restaurant industry in Las Cruces. I think that'd be optimal, right? We don't want to pick winners and losers and try to help out as many people as we can necessarily. So, other than that, I want to say that I'm really proud of the city's response to COVID and the way that we responded with compassion and using our Telsure Fund, I think, is an exemplary way to to use that funding. And so I'm very happy with what we did, everything that staff was able to put together so quickly, working with council. I'm very proud of. It also makes me think a little bit about what kind of, how we can actually keep some of these programs and these funds going, right? I think post-COVID, our community suffers from poverty at a pretty high rate. I think nearly a third of our communities lives under the federal poverty level. And so I think we have to start thinking about how to make some of these investments sustainable long-term through actual programs that are embedded in departments that we can continue to raise funds for. Because even when COVID theoretically goes away, poverty is still not going to go away. And so I think we've shown what the city can do in terms of supporting folks that really need the help. And so I don't want us to forget about what we did during this response when COVID is over. I think I'd love for us to have conversations about how we make these programs sustainable and find funding sources and revenue so that we can continue to help people pay rent. We can continue to help people pay their bills, and we can provide the resources to, especially those in our community that are going through mental health or physical abuse or domestic abuse. How can we support those programs more or continue our support for them? Maybe not at the same levels, but definitely at sustainable levels. So I'm glad that we've shown we can do it. I'm glad that we've worked all the legal angles, right, in terms of the anti-donation clause so that we know what's possible in the future in terms of contributions we can make to the well-being of our community. So with that, I just want to thank staff for all their hard work, and also, for partnering with our local nonprofits. That's something that I've wanted to see more of in the city for a long time. And we have a pretty oftentimes cumbersome or complicated vendor process where not everybody or not every nonprofit necessarily can partner with the city. And I think we've talked about some of the insurance issues in the past on liability and other things, but I think we want to make it easier for the city as an entity to continue partnering with community organizations to provide services, not to duplicate services, and to support people on the ground who have been doing this work for a long time. And so with that, thank you so much, Natalie. I appreciate your presentation today. Happy that so many of those funds have gone to so many families. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. Just one quick comment. And so I just verified our poverty level. The city of Las Cruces is at 24.4%. And I know you said it's close to a third. And I don't know, I guess last year it was highly debated that, almost given the, that it was the city council's fault that we actually have so many people in poverty. And I have to tell you that as long as I can remember, it actually was a little bit higher. It hasn't improved a whole lot in the last 20 some odd years, but it's improved by about 2 or 3% downward, which is good. So I didn't want it to be saying it was close to a third, because that's like 33%, which is
yeah. I thought it was 28. Yeah, I thought it was 28.
It's at 24.4. So,
Mr. Mayor,
yes,
Mr. Mayor, members of council, just for some historical knowledge, back in 2000, when we did a major update to the consolidated plan, I think that year we had 33% of our children in poverty, and our children living in poverty is still high versus total households. I think we're still children, and we'll get that information updated in the next consolidated plan, as well as through the census update. That's information we get there as well. We were at 28% family household poverty. So we have seen improvements in the community. It helps with a diversified economy, a higher educational attainment level, and so forth. But it's been a long-standing situation with our poverty rate in Las Cruces, and it's attributed to a multitude of factors. And so I feel like the city's doing its part with what funding we receive from the federal and state government. But as we all know, it's never enough. So
thanks, David. Thanks for that. Before we get to Councilor Sorgan, one other thing, Councilor Vasquez, I like your idea about being able to, not just after we get through this, but be able to help in the future. And I'm just going to circle back to if we ever get and get that land developed, if we do it, the vision that I had on the Loman property, leased portion. That would be income that's totally unencumbered. And I was thinking that we could give it to, that divided by 6 council members, and then you have access to do what you need to do. Almost like a nice little amount. I'm guessing each one would probably could get 30,000 a year, collectively a couple 100,000, and just off of that portion of commercial land. So that would be something to possibly keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so we have Councilor Sorg and then Councilor Bencomo. Oh, excuse me. Natalie, did you have a comment? Natalie Green?
I did, Mr. Mayor, for Councilor Beita-Stuvy, I did receive a response from FYI. So there was 16 RFPs submitted. So they selected 10 out of the 16.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Councilor Sorg and then Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To begin with, Natalie, you've done a great job as usual. I'm always impressed with your work that you've done for the city. Well, with all that discussion, since when I raised my hand, much of what I was going to say is almost all said. There is one thing that Councilor Vasquez was talking about that I totally agree with, and that is something continuing. We have had a continuing year after year support for organizations such as you're talking about, that we've gotten out of the interest and dividends of the Telsure Fund. It's never enough. Obviously, it's never enough. I've always been trying to get more, use all of the interest and dividends, which of course varies from year to year, but use it all instead of putting, and just keep the corpus the same amount year after year. I'm still in favor of that. But, like the mayor says, there's other sources of revenue that we could use for these organizations too. So yeah, we're doing it and we need to do more. Agreed. I've been doing some chatting on the chat thing about the restaurants thing. I don't know the restaurant business that well, but I would assume all restaurants in the city here are managed with a local person. What distinguishes persons that are owned and not owned? I understand sometimes McDonald's has restaurants that are locally owned. So I suppose that local person has built the restaurant and so forth and just has a franchise agreement. But anyway, I don't understand it that well. Anyway, so there was other things that I was going to say, but you've already said it, so I'm just going to let it go. Mr. Mayor, you good job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. It's funny, a while back, I was talking to the owner of McDonald's in El Paso. And I said, I can't believe that restaurant on, I'll just say this, I won't say the street. He says, they got to be the slowest in the world. And he looked at me and says, Ken, that's a company store. That's not one of his stores. He owns almost every McDonald's in El Paso, except 2. And that's one of the company stores. So the difference is, and I think that's what council was trying to get at, they wanted a locally owned store versus a company store that's controlled by the company. Okay, Councilor Bencomo and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. My apologies, everyone. I was a little late. Natalie, could you email me your presentation? I won't ask you to go through all of it again. That's not fair for everyone, but if you could email it to me, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate that. I was basically just going to ask that, but now that we're on this topic of the poverty rate, I mean, I think 24, 28, 33, they're all terribly high. I often hear the city, especially through this COVID, talk about that we're in a lucky place, not compared to our sister cities in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and that we have very healthy budgets here locally. I think, we have a 24% poverty rate. I mean, I think that's not okay. And it's certainly not council's fault, but I think council has a big role and responsibility to play in how we make a significant stride in minimizing that poverty rate. And I think if we have that opportunity, we should take it. I'd love to understand how that breaks down by district. I'd love to understand what that 24% looks like when we think of it in terms of districts 1 through 6. And then, Mr. Mayor, I would argue that, if I love, the idea of the low-end property, but I would argue that we should distribute that equitably through districts who perhaps see more poverty rates in them, perhaps should get more funding. I think that would be really important. And so, I want to throw that out there. And then maybe this question is more for Mr. Maestas or Barbara, I'm not sure, but in terms of CARES Act money, I know that we had gotten a presentation on that and it was very restricted. What does that look like for the city? I know that we obviously didn't get CARES Act like bigger cities across the country. What do we think it looks like for the future? Do we have an understanding and analysis of more federal relief specifically to COVID and how we'll be able to use it? If it's going to come from the state, is it not? Does anybody have any understanding of what that might look like?
Thank you, Councilor.
If I could answer, Mayor and
Sure.
Councilor Bencomo, we actually have Amy Bassford attending the meeting to assist with that information. So I just want to invite Amy to provide a response.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, they did it right.
Amy, are you there? Hello? Hello?
No, did I lose it?
Who are they waiting for?
Amy Johnson Bassford.
Here I am. Sorry. Problem with my mute button this morning. I apologize. And start my video. Yes. And I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question for me?
They wanted to know about the CARES Act funding. I know some of the larger cities that were 500,000 or more in population got immediate funding, such as Albuquerque. But I also seem to recall that Congress passed a bill also for smaller cities, but it's based on a different formula. And so they just wanted to know if you were aware of what amount City of Las Cruces might be receiving.
So yes, let me share my screen. This is information that Larry Haran, our lobbyist, shared with us the other day. And there's some scenarios that the legislator will be reviewing when they meet at the end of next week. And so let me share that screen with you very quickly.
Hey, Amy, before you do that,
Yes.
the mayor and Councilor Bencomo is asking on our status of our CARES Act funding.
Okay. Let me start with that one then.
Before you go to the state situation.
Okay. Great. Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet. There you go.
There we go. This is a matrix that we've developed to cover all of the different sources of federal funding that came under the CARES Act that the city has directly received or will be receiving. The FEMA disaster relief, this first column, that is disaster money that will be ongoing. It will cover 75% of our expenses. They are expenses directly related to COVID, so it can be overtime, it can be PPEs, it can be disinfection, incident management, food, water, supply. This is your basic funding that comes out every time there is a disaster in our community or any community. So this is an ongoing application that we will receive funding from. The Federal Aviation Division allotted a certain amount of money for all airports to continue operating during the COVID crisis. And we have received $69,000 for that, and that will be used for some operating expenses in fiscal year 21. You will be seeing this agreement come before you at the July 6th meeting. The FTA, which is our Federal Transit Administration, has allotted out of the CARES Act for the city $6 million plus. This is 100% reimbursement. Many of these are 100% reimbursement, which is great. We don't have any match for many of these. This is for any and all operating expenses for transit. That will be coming for you this Monday, the agreement. And this is includes any expenses due to lost revenue. So at this time, since we are allowing the buses to run for free and we have a reduced revenue, this will help cover that. This funding will start covering expenses from April 1 until it is expended. So we anticipate that this will last between 11 and 15 months, depending on how operations are adjusted for the various issues that are related to the crisis and any surges that we might have in the future. Then we have the Bureau, our Department of Justice. This is our burn grant. This is phase 1. This was paid for or given to the Department of Public Safety in New Mexico, and they are putting out 2 phases of funding. Under this first phase, for our police department, we have received $151,000. That money is 100% reimbursable. This is specific to COVID, overtime, equipment, PPEs, disinfecting, supplies, training, travel, even hiring additional personnel that are needed to respond to the crisis. This agreement should be coming forward to you in early July. We are hoping, I think it's in the final phases of execution. And then we have the National Endowment for the Humanities, which we have applied for. This is an application process. We have not heard yet what we will be receiving. We applied for approximately $300,000 at 100% reimbursement. What we will be doing with this funding is developing digital and virtual programming for the museum and the library. It will cover some staff expenses to develop that type of programming. And so that would include things like our GED program that we have at the library, some of the art classes from the museums, and a variety of other digital programming to continue that process. The New Mexico Department of Arts received some funding, and they moved that out to us in increments of 10,000 was the maximum we could apply for. And this will be to retain employees. We will be utilizing this funding should it be awarded for the technical services at the Rio Grande Theater during the time it's closed. And let me just scroll over a little bit so you can see that better. And so then we have the FEMA assistance to firefighters. This is a specific amount of funding directly to fire for PPEs due to the COVID crisis. It does not cover salaries or regular fire PPEs, so we can't purchase any of their really strong PPEs that they use when they're in a fire, but this will provide for a lot of funding for ongoing needs that they have. And we've asked for $101,000. We are still pending, waiting to pick that one back to get an approval on that one. Just yesterday, we submitted an application to the Institute of Library and Museum Services for quality of life. I believe that the total that we asked for was $325,000. I'm sorry, I haven't updated this since it was submitted yesterday. This is a continuation of what we proposed in the New Mexico Endowment for the Arts to continue to develop the digital services through the library. It does include also hotspots that can be checked out by those who do not have internet access, as well as some tablets and things that will be available to be checked out from the library as well. So those individuals who do not have access to computers or to internet and are dependent on the library's computer lab that they can't use at this time would be able to check out some equipment that would allow them to access the internet from home. HUD provided funding through the CDBG, which Natalie has done a great job of telling you in the past about what was going to be happening with that funding. That was $560,000. The Department of Justice, directly from the federal government, provided an allotment through the Burn Grant funding, which we have received multiple times. That amount is $59,622. And that is 100% reimbursement, again, directly related to COVID, overtime equipment, PPEs, supplies. The police are going to do some unique things. They're going to purchase some of the foggers that they can disinfect the cars with after they have had somebody in their vehicle. They're going to have the foggers so that they can disinfect the interrogation rooms and the holding cells and those kinds of things, as well as have a mobile unit where they can drive a car in and completely disinfect it. So those are some unique things that the police department is trying. Now I'm going to try and move you guys so that I can show you the rest of the things over here. And then under the non-metro area agency on aging, we have received funding through the Families First COVID Response Act in the amount of 107. This is specifically for nutrition for home delivered and congregate meals, and it does have to be used by the end of, I believe this one is the end of September. And then we also received funding through that same agency through the CARES Act of $133,000. This provides respite care, nutrition, supportive services. And that one, I believe they have until the end of December to use. So that is a overview of the federal funding that we have applied for. To receive some funding from Meals on Wheels for shelf-stable meals. That was $25,000. We're looking at applying at other foundations that may be providing some COVID or CARES Act funding to keep operations going during that time period. So at this point, this is what we have applied for. And we've got a couple still that are out there waiting for responses. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on that.
Thank you.
Would you like me to cover what the legislature is going to be discussing regarding the $1.25 billion?
I don't have a problem with that if you've got it handy.
I do. Let me just stop sharing this screen and start sharing another. So the other day, let me know when you can see this, Mayor.
Yes.
Okay, so the other day, let me try and make this bigger so you all can see it a bit better. The other day, Larry Haran, our lobbyist, provided information to us about what was going to be proposed during the legislative session that was going to start on the 18th. They have come up with several scenarios on how to distribute the $1.25 billion that the state was allotted for everyone other than Albuquerque. And so they've got these 4 different scenarios here on methodology. And basically the first one is to use the methodology of how they're distributing internet sales tax. The second one is to use per capita and gross receipts support allocations. The third one is to use the per capita, the gross receipts, tax calculations, and the COVID impact allocation. And you can see there how they're kind of looking at distributing this. There's 60% of it under the per capita. They're looking at 60% to municipalities and 40% to counties. They are looking to fund a replacement of about 10% of GRT in aggregate. And then there's a $15 million set aside for those municipalities and counties most affected by COVID. And then the fourth scenario, and this is a proposal and we're not sure exactly how they will be handling this. This is should the proposal that is currently before Congress pass, this would be how they would distribute that stimulus package to municipalities. And so then as I scroll down here, you can see what Las Cruces is, and I'm sorry, we're not the ones circled in red. We're the very first one up here. I'm not sure why they sent out something that only had that particular location circled, but for Las Cruces, we have a population of 102,000. The support for local GRT lost is estimated at approximately 5 million. There's support for the state GRT that would be lost, and that's at 3.9 million. We did not have a significant COVID impact as Farmington and Gallup and those did, so that is 0 for us. A per capita distribution is 5.1 million. So in all, depending on the scenario 1, 2, or 3, we will receive slightly in excess of $14 million from the state. Under scenario 4, I think that is additional funding, but I'm not positive how they're going to do this. That would be an additional 8.9 million. The good news is that we believe that this will come directly into the city, such as our gross receipts tax does, and therefore can go directly into the general fund. Leanne Demouche, our chief budget officer, is also on this morning and can answer any questions on how this funding might be used. Again, this is all dependent on what the legislator does at the end of next week. So I will be happy to answer any questions on this as well.
Okay, well, thanks. Let's see here. We have Councilor Bencomo that was just talking, that asked the question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was it. My only follow-up I was going to have, and probably not for Amy, but thanks, Amy. I really appreciate this information. Yeah. Could we, I don't know who would be able to do this, but could we get that data in terms of poverty rates by district? Is that possible? And can someone work their magic? Dr. Payares, maybe? I don't know. But I would, and they don't have to answer it right now, but I would like to see that information.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, David.
To answer, this is David Dallahan for the record. To answer Councilor Bencomo's question, that's a complicated process. We will try. I think realistically, we're more likely to get it with the census information that we can, and with the consolidated plan, that we can get it at a district level. Because of privacy issues with the census and so forth, it's a little bit hard to get their data at a level that we can extract it to council level because the boundaries don't always overlap. I will work with CD staff to see what we can do with previous census information, but it's going to be a little dated, and we can look at American Community Survey. Maybe we can extract, and then we'll put that in the discussion definitely for consolidated plan. Another issue that might be helpful for you that I can ask Natalie to share is our designated low-income neighborhoods through the HUD program. So we have area specifics, and then they can show on a map related to your council districts. That one's an easy one we can provide in short order, but the poverty is a little more difficult. But we will try.
Mayor and David, if I may, that was something I asked for when I came on the council, and I was provided a map.
Councilor Vasquez, can you state your name, please, real quick?
Yes, this is Councilor Vasquez. I apologize. I just wanted to say I did receive a map when I first came on. That was I think it was poverty levels by census tracts, but it had the districts kind of roped around the map or designated around the map in different colors, so you could essentially see the census tracts through poverty, the poverty levels of each census tract, but then there was also an overlay of each district on top of that map. And so I think that should be out there somewhere that staff has produced before. Thank you.
Yeah, tying it to the census tract is easy enough. I think that Mayor David Dallahan, for the record, talking to Councilor Vasquez's comments, we can overlay that information. It's trying to get it district wide as one number, maybe more difficult. We can show you the areas that have higher poverty rates. It's just we can't give you a total number by district, I don't believe, but we'll look into it.
Thanks, David. Councilor Sorg, did you forget to put your hand down?
No, I did not. I had some continual.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to put you behind since you've already spoken I'm gonna go with Mayor Pro Tem if that's okay, and then I'll catch you. I just
Sure.
wanted to, okay.
Sure, she
Mayor-
did too, but that's okay.
Mayor Pro Tem? Mayor Pro Tem Gondara?
I'm here.
Okay.
Does Councilor Stork feel a need to go before me? I'm happy to yield the floor to him. Okay. I wanted to suggest or recommend piggybacking on the questions about the restaurants and the vouchers. I think that the 16 RFPs and 6 were not selected, and I'm thinking it's because of the money. There wasn't additional money, and I'd like to recommend to council to provide funding so that we can help those 6 other restaurants, whoever they might be, so that just because they're still at 50%, if they are, I don't know who those 6 are, but I'm sure they're struggling to get themselves up and running. And I'd like to recommend that. The other thing is, thanks, Amy. That's a lot of information. I'm really impressed with the organization and the spreadsheet. I think and then all the work that is being done to make that happen. I'm assuming there's applications that need to be that you apply for in order for the funding and such. So this is excellent. One of the things that is twofold for me is I'm really excited about the opportunities for decreasing the digital divide, right? Like helping to the museums and the libraries to assist them in making sure that our constituency have the availability of computers and tablets and hotspots. I think that's going to be really, really helpful. And I think one of the things that we were struggling, I've got a few phone calls with folks that were using the library computers and then unable to write. And so when you're required to fill things out via internet and you don't have that kind of access, especially for unemployment and such, I think that's going to be really helpful, and especially to our families, because I think that there will probably be another surge. It looks like we may even enter into the schools going into a second phase of virtual learning, and we have to make sure, and I've often said how proud I am of the response. I didn't hear anything about the schools, Natalie. We gave the schools quite a bit of money, and I wasn't sure if we'd receive an update on that, how they were able to spend that money or continue to spend that money. But I think that's going to continue to be really helpful to these families that, first of all, that I've heard through community in the schools, they've had some difficulty connecting with families. Some of them just sort of fell off the grid, if you will, and haven't been able to communicate or contact them. And I think as school starts, there's going to be a need to keep in contact with these families that have either guardians, grandparents that don't have access or even the knowledge about how to navigate using that. So I'm hoping that the city can play a bigger role than they already have, especially around museums and libraries with the schools. I think that's going to be really important. And I'm really excited because both Councilor Flores and Councilor Abeyta-Stubbe and I heard a wonderful presentation from the community and the schools from Cruces. I'm going to get the name wrong. I think I'm going to butcher it, but they have a program that they'll be working with teachers and people who want to provide sort of students, anything from government to art music, whatever that might be. And I think that's going to be really helpful and important. So I know that Miss Lynn Gallagher was on the phone and yesterday, and so she's very good about connecting the dots and really encourage us to do that with our Elevate Las Cruces plan and the community in the schools plan. And so so a very long thing, but Natalie, can we get an update on where the school's at with some of that funding?
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Candida, that's one of the contracts I don't work on, so I'm going to defer to Barbara if she's available to give you an update.
Okay.
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, Barbara DeLeon for the record. Mayor and Councilor Gondara, with respect to the funding that was allocated to the school district, so the purpose of that funding was to provide for high-speed internet to low-income student families and or teachers. They have entered into an agreement with Comcast to provide that service through June, free of charge. At that point, we will be helping to fund that service for the term of July 1st through October 30th. And so we've just received some information from the school district to help us to craft that agreement with them. And so we're anticipating we'll have that in place. So again, we can start providing that funding as of July 1st. They have not needed it up to this point because of the agreement they had with Comcast to get that for free of charge.
Well, that's nice of Comcast, huh? So why through October 30th?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, why through October 30th?
Why isn't it, through the end of the year or something?
At this point, that's a guidance that we have from the school counselor. And certainly if they think that terms may need to change, that we may need to consider something different, we'll be available to discuss that and bring that back to you as appropriate. That comes from the school though to us.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. Barbara, now could the internet, to help with the high-speed internet, can we open that up a little more to include hotspots, tablets, those kinds of things?
I don't have that information, but I can get that for you.
Okay. I just hope that we can connect with what the museum and library is doing, so that we don't duplicate efforts, but really put our funding together and really be able to, use the funding in the best way possible, not duplicate efforts.
Understood. We want to leverage that. Thank you, Counselor.
For sure. Thank you. Good work. Thanks. Thanks, Barbara. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem, I wonder if we can call on our friend Orlando and have him reach out to Dell and see if they want to donate some computers or tablets, or for.
Right, Mayor, that's a good idea. We should do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, give it a shot. Before, do me a favor here, if you would, you all, is apparently Mr. Colin Combs needs to leave at 11. And since I've gone through one full round of all of you, I know there's the Councilor Vasquez, Abeta Stuvey, and Councilor Sword that want to do a second round of questions. But can we go ahead and listen to Deputy Chief Jason Smith and Colin, and then that way there he can get his presentation out. You can ask any questions, and then we want to go back to this issue because there's actually a couple things I wanted to ask Natalie myself as well. Is that okay with you all? Okay, so if we can go ahead and ask DC Smith and Colin, that would be great to make your presentation. That way there, in case council has questions, they can get these out of the way. Colin can go to his 11 o'clock, and we'll come back to this issue here with Natalie.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council.
Morning.
Jason Smith, Deputy Chief for the Fire Department, in charge of operations. I'm going to be introducing Colin Combs. He's our emergency manager for Doña Ana County in the city of Las Cruces. Just some background information on him. He is retired Air Force, retired as a Master Sergeant after 23 years of service. In October of 2018, he was hired as our emergency manager here for our OEM. So with that, Colin's going to do kind of an update, a little bit of background information on the Emergency Operations Center and the Office of Emergency Management, and then we'll get into our response to COVID. So Colin, if you want to take it, sir.
Thank you, DC Smith. Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Cullen Combs. I'm the Emergency Manager for Doña Ana County in the City of Las Cruces, as DC Smith stated. Today, I want to kind of take you through the structure of OEM and what we've been about to lead up to the COVID response. Before I get into the formal presentation, I also want to just extend my thanks to the Las Cruces Fire Department, Las Cruces Police Department, Las Cruces Finance. There's been a lot of great support from the city with this and really enabled us to be able to help the residents, citizens here within our jurisdiction to be able to best serve them as we've been moving through this pandemic. So why does the Office of Emergency Management exist here for Doña Ana County in the City of Las Cruces? It's a managerial function which creates a framework to allow for folks to come together, subject matter experts in different disciplines, everything from public works to law enforcement to fire to finance, to be able to make a cohesive response once normal resources are overwhelmed. Every day within our community, we have emergencies which occur that I have nothing to do with. The reason for that is, for instance, if there's a dumpster fire or a house fire, the Las Cruces Fire Department is well equipped to deal with that one incident. But if we had a whole block catch on fire and whatnot, that's where resources could become stretched. And what I would do is then, through the Office of Emergency Management, help assist with resource management and obtaining greater support for those. So I wanted to just want you to see that what the OEM allows for is the ability for folks to come together and be able to manage a larger scale disaster. We have different phases that we go through, from preparedness to response to recovery and mitigation. And obviously in all those areas, there's different planning efforts that go on as we walk through those. Within this, we follow, a lot of our doctrine comes from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration. And as we look at it, again, kind of talking about what type of disasters we have in our community, there's a way that they kind of articulate that through a type system. You have a type 5 through 1 of different types of disasters. Again, the type 5 would be a small incident, which can be usually managed within a few hours and by a single agency. And then as the numbers decrease, the level of the incident goes up. Really, what we're dealing with right now within this pandemic would be considered a type 1. Reason for that is there's national and international impact of what has happened because of the pandemic, the different aspects which it has affected our nation, state, but then our local jurisdiction here. And you know that those effects aren't just our emergency response, but we have economic impact, we have social impact, we have psychological impact. So a lot of different aspects we've been dealing with as we've been moving through that. And within, which DC Smith will speak to in detail, but within the incident command that's been established, we've been trying to address those different areas and not stay myopically focused on just one part of that. So how do we accomplish that? That's accomplished through what's called the incident command system. And I'll just give you a definition here. It's a management system designed to enable effective and efficient domestic incident management by integrating a combination of facilities, equipments, personnel, procedures, and communications that operate to, and this is the important part, to make a common organizational structure. So that way we aren't having duplication of effort, but rather we're moving together in unity to be able to make sure that we're being most efficient with our time as we address the different areas. There's usually 5 components which consist of an ICS structure. You have command, which at current, DC Smith is the incident commander for this. You have operations, that's being headed up by DC Crispin from Doña Ana County Fire. Excuse me, I stand corrected. That's by DC Paul Brock from Las Cruces Fire or Police Department. And then the planning section is being headed up by DC Crispin. Logistics is firefighter Kevin Packey And he's been doing a lot of that PPE processing from the state and helping out, getting it distributed out to different entities, and it's been a huge help. You can have an intelligence and investigation unit. As of right now, for this operation, we do not have one established. Finance, Amy Bassford has been doing an outstanding job in just keeping us informed of all the things that are going on within the state and the different funding opportunities and tracking processes. So I really appreciate all those efforts. So this is how we are able to form a cohesive approach to what we've been dealing with the COVID. And then so you see ICS/ESF, that's emergency support function. So within our emergency operations center, we have then different, again, subject matter experts that are working within there, and they are grouped by a function. So like ESF1 is transportation, ESF2 is communications. Why do we have this? Well, this is a universal thing for anyone who adopts the National Incident Management System, which our jurisdiction has. And so I can pick up from here in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and deploy to somewhere in Florida and walk into their emergency operations center. They would have the same setup. So we have a common language that we're utilizing as we're coming into incident response. And that's helpful, particularly as I've had to deploy and work in different environments outside of my normal work environment, and then be able to step into another organization and understand how they're functioning. So within the EOC, we have the different levels of activation that I just want to kind of talk through. You can see there's levels 4 through 1, 4 being the least, 1 being the greatest as we look at that. Right now, we are considered at a level type 1. Why is that? Because we have a presidential declaration of disaster along with a state declaration of disaster. And as you all are well aware, a local declaration of disaster. And then looking at the impact to our community, we've had to bring in a lot of different functions and work through this problem set that COVID has presented to us, along with management of other preparedness efforts going along with the COVID. So we're monitoring other activities that are going on in our community that may be a concern or a threat to the safety of our community. And it's a complex event. And one of the things that we've had to do as we've negotiated this event too, and also with the social distancing, just normal meetings aren't able to take place. So we've had to do a lot more tele type events and being able to bring this together. But it's been a kind of a hybrid response is how I would describe it, because of the way we've functioned. But I think it's been working well, particularly as again, Las Cruces Fire Department stepped up and really came in and started to help out with the command and control, has been a really useful tool in deconflicting some of the things that were early on. And as I approached this event and looking at it, we were saying, this is not going to be a sprint. It's not like the church bombings that we had a few years ago. This is going to be a sustained emergency that we're going to be going through with not really a defined end date in time. So we were hesitant to activate the EOC when we were looking at it, but then as we started to step through it and get, as it grew, we reached a tipping point to where that came about. So let me just kind of first walk us through the timeline of the things that happened, and then I'll kind of give you a picture, and then I'll turn it over to DC Smith unless anyone would have any questions. So again, it was an evolving situation. On March 2nd, I was at the Partners in Preparedness Conference up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we were going through, it was supposed to be a normal conference, but it really became a planning event because the COVID threat had started to emerge at that point. We started to see in Washington State, starting a little bit in New York and whatnot, started to see where this is going to become an issue. And obviously we'd seen what had happened internationally, and we're starting to track that. So as we were coming together, and the Partners in Preparedness is a conference sponsored by the New Mexico Department of Health, we were actually able to set up a tabletop exercise, kind of start to look at all the different components of what would be needed for a state response. So then on March 9th, the state EOC moved to a level 3. Again, looking at our different activation levels, they start to say, okay, we've gone from normal to where we need to start to monitor this situation. They start sending out some updates and whatnot. And we were able to start to have a little bit of communication and start to get a little bit more visibility to what was going on. On March 10th, I presented along with a Memorial Medical Center and the Department of Health a presentation to the Board of County Commissioners on the threat of COVID and kind of start to explain a little bit of what it was and walking through that, leaning heavily on the medical expertise. Then on March 11th, our governor made a public health emergency declaration. And then following that, on March 13th, the president declared a national emergency declaration, and the EOC on that day moved to a level 1 activation. So a full activation was created and all the resources were brought to bear. A lot of the National Guard started to step in and assist with that. Then on the 16th, I established a joint information center, which I'm hoping that has been a useful tool to you as we've moving through, because I know a lot of desire for information and whatnot was wanting to be put out. And we were trying to figure out the best way to present that information as we stepped through it. And be honest with you, there was, I think, some trips along the way. And I wanted to keep people informed, but also try to manage my time most effectively to be able to support our community. But the JIC, as it would be referred to, the Joint Information Center, allows for each public information officer from each jurisdiction. So we have representatives from the city of Las Cruces, representatives from the county, the city, and then all of our other municipalities to come together and just kind of talk daily. Through that, we've also been able to now provide frequent updates to what is going on as far as our regional capability for our different hospitals and being able to present that information. And that's also something I'm monitoring and looking at daily, because that's really our trigger to say, is there an issue that's going to occur once we go past a certain capacity? Thus far, we have not hit that. And that has given me a little bit of confidence in the fact that our local medical infrastructure hasn't become overwhelmed. Then on March 18th, logistics section was established because we start to receive strategic national stockpile shipments, and then started a regular rotation of ordering PPE to support the different entities that were required needing for it. Then on March 23rd, we established, because of some issues that first responders were having as they were responding to COVID and wanting to get safety procedures out, we established what we refer to now as the First Responders Operational Group, affectionately called the FROG. And that allows a collaboration between fire, EMS, police, to be able to come together and just talk about different issues and keeping everyone safe as we're moving through that. And that's been a really productive working group. Then on the 30th of March, I was able to present a update to you all on what was going on with the COVID response. The 13th of April, and this is kind of leading into where we're at now, we were able to establish Unified Area Command and really started to tighten down our response and be able to get a much more productive means by which to manage a lot of the data that we're receiving, and then also partnering with the Department of Health to help assist with testing and getting more of that epidemiological footprint needed to kind of define where exactly our threat was and who was being affected by that. Our participating agencies within the Unified Area Command, as already mentioned, Las Cruces Fire Department and Police Department have been very helpful. CLC Finance, and then Doña Ana County Fire and Emergency Services, DASO, Doña Ana County Sheriff's Office, Doña Ana County Health and Human Services, led by Jamie Michael, has been a really helpful entity that has provided support, and then also just kind of helping understand not just the medical side, but the mental health issues that we've been dealing with, and making sure that there's a full orbed approach to as we approach this COVID and we don't again become singly focused. So a lot of kudos to Mrs. Michaels. She's been a great partner to work with within that. We had Doñana County Fire, and then actually down south, Sunland Park Fire Department has really stepped through and provided a lot of support. And in fact, Captain Dennis Shane is leading from Sunland Park Fire Department, is leading the FROG, the First Responders Operation Group. So it's been really helpful. Before we turn it over to DC Smith, is there any questions of myself?
Let's see here. Well, the first one in line was supposed to be Councilor Vasquez, and then Councilor Beta Stuvi, and then Councilor Sorg. I don't know if Councilor Vasquez, did you have any questions of Colin?
Not for Mr. Combs at this time. I had another comment, so I'll let others.
Councilor Beta Stuvi?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Combs, for providing these resources for us. I do have a question in regards just to how we function as an agency together with other items that are kind of joint powers. I know that we have both county and city representatives that kind of either have a board, have an oversight, so that there's some sort of communication that comes through for different leaderships. What does that look like for your department?
So right now with the structure that we have an agreement between the county and city, which brings about the funding for this office, along with the pass-through funds from the federal government through the state, through DHSEM, Department of Homeland Security Emergency Management, to bring that about. Typically, with the city of Las Cruces, I communicate directly to the fire chief and the police chief as matters arise. And then also Mr. Maestas, as the city manager, keeps me updated. And then also I provide him information as he requested. But we don't have an executive board, for instance, like with MIRBDA or something like that at this time.
Okay, and direct oversight for your department comes from where?
From Doñana County Fire and Emergency Services.
Thank you. And can you please describe, you talked a lot about not duplicating services or information, that sort of thing. Can you please describe what very specific items that your department has been able to bring here as a resource?
Well, what we do is we have a operation plan that we put together, that we bring the different functions together to work in communication. So for instance, once we established that incident command, we were able to then start to have different subgroups to be able to manage different aspects. So we have like vulnerable populations, we have a communications team with the hospitals, we have DOH testing support. So what we've been able to do is kind of identify where the gaps are and ask for folks to serve in those positions to be able to help serve, mitigate any of those issues. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
A bit, perhaps.
Mayor and Councilor, if I could, there is another section of the presentation left to go through that describes the actual actions that we've been performing since we opened up the UAC, the Unified Area Command.
Oh, thank you, UD Smith. Thank you, Colin. I think Mr. Combs, what I was looking for is kind of what does that typical day look like? I know that you're probably reaching out from state agencies to local stuff, and then how many are also in your department?
So currently I have four people assigned to my department, including myself.
Okay. And what does that typical day look like to you, as typical as an emergency response can be?
Are you talking about within the COVID response?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a series of meetings that we go through to just keep everyone updated. Right now we have a Monday morning planning meeting, and then Tuesday through Thursday we step through and have a daily update. And then Friday we have what's called the MAC call, which actually I think DC Smith will talk a little bit about. So that's a multi-agency coordination group, and that's your executive leadership that comes together and just gets a weekly update through that. We also then have the Joint Information Center, which is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where we get an update from them. And then the call that I got to be on in 5 minutes is with the state EOC, where we get an update from them as well.
Okay, and
go ahead.
Are you sorry, Mr. Combs, are you the facilitator then on those local calls?
On some of them, yes, ma'am. And then some I participate in.
Okay, thank you. In the effort to make sure other counselors have time to ask questions, I will leave the rest of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I think that's it for Colin. So, okay, Colin, I guess you're good. So thank you for your presentation and have a good weekend. So I'm gonna turn it back to DC Smith, see if you want to continue with your presentation or if you're finished.
No, DC Smith has more to add, sir. So.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yep.
Thank you, Colin. Mayor, members of City Council, I continue on with our update. As we were talking about, different agencies were brought in through OEM to establish our unified area command. We set off very early to look at our objectives, what strategic results we wanted to achieve coming together for our community. We set up our initial incident command structure, which I'll go through and you'll get to see kind of in depth here. We formed the unified area command, assigning positions and getting people from Doña Ana County, Summit Park, and also the city of Las Cruces to fill in positions. So our strategic goals, you can see there, we wanted to definitely slow the spread of COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 virus. We wanted to keep clean our vulnerable population centers. These are things like assisted living or adult living, senior living facilities, or homeless populations. Anywhere where there's a potential for the COVID virus to spread rapidly and also have greater effect on that population. We also wanted to assist in protecting our healthcare professionals, our first responders, and our essential workers. Wanted to minimize the impact of COVID by working with our regional hospitals to ensure they had sufficient capacity to care for our critical patients. These would be ones that needed an ICU bed or needed to be ventilated. And we also wanted to prepare. We know that this virus is not going to leave our population anytime soon. And with the upcoming fall and flu season, we know we need to review and refine our operations for pandemic threats in the near future. From that, we came up with 10 very specific objectives that we're working towards and our ICS structure supports. The first one, to provide support to regional hospitals for critical care. The second one, to provide as a central receiving point for all of our jurisdictions for things like PPE, that's our logistical support. We also needed to support the Department of Health in their mission, where we don't make decisions on where or who they test or their ability to do follow-up. We do support them with resources when it comes to PPE and possibly personnel, traffic control, things like that. We also wanted to work on non-congregate sheltering. Early on, we looked at Centennial High School as an alternative care site. We also worked on finding places to place people to separate them from congregate sheltering if they happen to become infected. Finance, as we heard earlier today, is a big part of what goes on. Our finance section served as a information sharing and also data gathering. We worked on communication. This was communication across all areas to include our hospitals, our PIOs throughout the community, and also our multi-agency committee and our first responder group. We were able to share lessons learned and things that occurred in our department and other departments with each other to help us to be better prepared to respond. Recovery was another thing that we wanted to make sure we touched on. We wanted to look at our short-term and long-term recovery, both for our residents and our essential, non-essential workers, making sure that we provide information to anybody who's working on that recovery plan, and making sure that we also address issues that may not come up. One thing we talked about early on was the impact or mental or emotional stress on our employees and being able to address that. And with everything, an after-action review where we take our lessons learned, and we prepare for the future. So here you'll see our ICS structure. At the very top, you have the Unified Area Commanders. Is where I served as Incident Commander. My backup to me was DC Crispin. We report weekly out to the Multi-Agency Coordination Group, the MAC group. This is made up of mayors and policymakers, city manager, county manager throughout our area, and we provide them a weekly update. Our Joint Information Center, the liaison with OBM, Colin Combs. We had 2 operations sections: finance, logistics, planning. I'm going to go into depth of where we're at and what we've been doing with each of these, so you can see everything that's been going on. What's referred to as the JIC, that supports our objectives of coordinating with our regional hospitals for critical care, recovery planning, and then coordinating communication through the JIC, the MAC, and the first responders. In the MAC group, we had Sundon Park, Anthony, Hatch, Sia, Doña Ana County, Las Cruces with the acting city manager. We also had the hospitals, Memorial Medical Center and Mountain View, Las Cruces Public Schools, Gadsden Independent School District, Department of Health, Hatch Schools, and American Medical Response. So we really had a large group that we were communicating with every week and updating them on the steps that we were taking within the Unified Area Command to address concerns with COVID. Our sections chiefs, this area here was where most of the work was performed for our organization. It's split into 2 operations sections. The first one was, the chief of that one was Captain Bobby Holden from DASO. That was isolation stations with Jamie Michael. We had DC Brock in operations 2, who had a lot of branches underneath him doing a lot of work on the ground. Finance, really with Amy Basford and Mary Trail from the county, making sure that they communicated information to us that we could pass along to the first responder group, and then also to the MAC group for reporting expenses and using the FEMA portal and applying for grants. Planning is with DC Crispin from Doña Ana County Fire Emergency Services. This section here is always forward looking and planning out what our next incident action plan is going to look like and what things we need to get in the works and in the pipeline so that we can address in the upcoming days. And then logistics has been overseen by firefighter Nathan Carr, Francis Tejas, and now driver operator Kevin Pappy working on that. And this is where a lot of the daily activity takes place, receiving PPE and supplies, filling request orders, and then getting those out to the requesting agencies. So now to go a little bit in depth on each one of these. Isolation stations, this branch was looking at quarantine or isolation of first responders and civilians. Early on, we were making strides with NMSU for some of their housing, as well as local hotels and motels. Right now, we have an agreement through the State Emergency Operations Center for 2 hotels, both of the Hampton Inns here in the city of Las Cruces. This allows us to place first responders who may need to be placed into quarantine because they've had an exposure or are having signs and symptoms of COVID, or in isolation when they've actually been tested and found to be positive for the coronavirus. And then also for civilians, the same process for civilians. One thing that we did recognize, and we've been working with the state, and Jamie Michaels has been working on, is mental health. We found that someone who needs ongoing support with mental health issues and they are COVID positive, they need special care, and they need to either be placed in an area where they can be taken care of for their coronavirus or COVID symptoms, or they need to be placed somewhere where they can get their mental health support and remain isolated from the rest of that vulnerable population. So we've been trying to work through our local providers here in the city of Las Cruces, as well as state resources on that topic. Within our operations section 2, we have vulnerable populations. This is mainly an outreach and informational group. Early on, Lynn Gallagher was overseeing this branch. The objectives they support are number 6, to support communication through the JIC, also coordinate services to vulnerable populations, and then to plan for resurgence of COVID and seasonal flu later this year. So that takes place through outreach and information. Right now, Lieutenant Carrie Danes from LCPD is overseeing this branch as that branch chief. She's been making contact with numerous places. I think we're up to 43 different agencies that we've spoken to, 40 populations. We provide them information about how to communicate with our Unified Area Command, how to request resources. And then we're also trying to get them plugged into a state resource that comes from the state health secretary. Not the health secretary, but the Secretary for Aging and Long-Term Care. They have a strike team they put together that goes through these skilled nursing facilities and helps outline how they can put in processes and procedures to isolate people who are either infected with coronavirus, are recovered from, and then their general population. So we're making sure we reach out to these vulnerable population centers and provide them information and get them tied in with the Unified Area Command. Healthcare coordination. This is our communication and coordination with our regional hospitals. This is done by Jackie Saldana. She's one of the staff members at OEM. This is an ongoing daily thing that she receives information from them about how many ICU beds they have available, status of ventilators, their pipeline of patients, the persons under investigation. PUIs is a common term they use for that group where they're showing symptoms, but they have not yet been diagnosed with coronavirus or COVID-19. Does a lot of data reporting, helps us in our planning section on what resources we need from the state so that we can make sure we're forecasting ahead and being ahead of our curve for demand. We'll go into a little bit of specifics to get you up to date of where we're at. Right now, as of yesterday afternoon, we have 56 ICU beds in our region being used. Our total surge capacity, meaning how large or how many ICU beds can be put into play, is 149. So we have 93% beds that are available. So we have 62%. And that's where we've really been trending since March, since we started this group and we've been communicating with our regional hospitals. We've been right around that 62 to 63% beds available. We have currently 15 COVID patients admitted. Total, we've only had 27 patients admitted to the hospital with COVID. So since we started this reporting in March, 27 patients total. Currently, there's 15. Ventilator use, we have 12 ventilators in use. We have a capacity of 90. So you can see we have 78 ventilators available in our region. Currently, one COVID patient is ventilated. And that's just an example of a weekly, we do this report daily, and then we share that information weekly with the MAC group. Department of Health Ops Support. This is a branch that's overseen by David Daniels from Department of Health. It's really our information and planning and awareness branch. It tells us what the Department of Health is working on. We're able to be in the loop on where they're going to be testing, where the case outbreaks are. If there's any organizations or places of employment that are having an outbreak, we get that information so we can plug that into our planning section and start talking about what resources we need to try to send to them, whether it's PPE or it's a vulnerable population outreach. So we get that information a few times a week from David Daniels, and where they're at right now is Department of Health is moving from a surveillance type testing to more of case investigation and contact tracing. So a lot of the ongoing just system observation or the spread observation is going to be switching to federal partners here locally. So to bring you up to date on some of our numbers within Doña Ana County and the state of New Mexico, total tested for our county, 21,850. We've had 21,218 negative results. That's about finding about 2 to 3% of people who are tested return positive results. Currently hospitalized, 15, and unfortunately we have had 5 deaths related to COVID in our region, in our county. I think in a past meeting you may have heard of an R effective rate that the state refers to. There was no update this week for that number. last week that our affected rate that they reported from the state epidemiologic office was 1.09. So they try to make sure that we're under 1.1 to really be slowing the spread. As you can see there, the state of New Mexico, the total numbers tested, negative, currently hospitalized, and the number of deaths. Another thing that we tracked is the number of people who are positive. There's, I believe, the official name for the new novel coronavirus is the SARS-CoV-2. Why this is important is CDC guidelines give you some guidance on when you can be presumed recovered from the virus if you're not having symptoms. So if you're not having symptoms past 3 days and you're 10 days past the first time you had onset of symptoms, you can be considered recovered. Obviously, this is a little bit different than if you're still in the hospital or you have symptoms. But if we went back to June 29th, we had 439 confirmed cases in our county. If none of those patients are having any symptoms right now for the past 72 hours, they could be considered recovered. And with only 15 patients in the hospital, there's a good number of those positive tests that should be considered recovered. One thing we've asked Dave Daniels to pass up through the chain of command through the Department of Health is trying to get those numbers for our county, what the Department of Health is considering recovered. This recovery guidance from the CDC is a little bit different than what we might use in a skilled nursing facility, places where we have a vulnerable population. In those areas, we're probably going to be using a 2 sequential tests, both being negative before we consider that population recovered. Reason for that is vulnerable populations just have a higher risk for spread, and then also the impacts of coronavirus are much higher. So for general population, healthy, the 10 days since your first symptoms and 72 hours symptom-free is a good guidance from the CDC. Our first responder group, this is led by Captain Dennis Shane from Sunland Park Fire. They really help with our first responders, sharing information. We were able to share information about our positive coronavirus cases within LCFD, as well as the cases within our police department, and share our steps and our processes for taking care of our people through that group. We also get support for Department of Health for test sites and locations through that group. So they're working on several of our objectives, remaining a resource for request, collecting data for FEMA for financial support and reimbursement, and then communication through the JIC and the MAC group. Participating in this group, it's a long list, so I'm going to read it out. I apologize for the monotone reading here, but Anthony Police Department, LCPD, Las Cruces Fire, Sunland Park Fire, and Police, Doña Ana County Sheriffs, Doña Ana County Fire, NASA, the White Sands Test Facility, NMSU Police and Fire, New Mexico State Police, the Mesilla Marshals, Mesilla Fire Department, Hatch Police, White Sands Missile Range, American Medical Response, or AMR, Mesilla Valley Dispatch, MRVDA, and then also our Office of Emergency Management. So it is a large group of responders in our community that do communicate about our experiences and our steps we're taking to slow the spread of coronavirus. Department of Health testing, this is a support branch. So we support the mission of DOH when it comes to their test and go sites, what they call the tag sites, as well as N95 fit testing. So the resources they use are law enforcement for traffic control, fire, our EMTs are doing some of the testing and also running some of the test sites along with them. We also do fit testing for N95 mask. You have probably have all heard N95 mask is the standard of PPE for healthcare providers, those in close continuous contact with positive or potentially positive coronavirus patients. The N95 respirator keeps them at a safer level. And then we also do some logistics with locations where they're going to be testing when they need a site. Our main objective here is to free up Department of Health staff from some of those testing roles and responsibilities so that they can focus on contact tracing and also their rapid response team for going into facilities or organizations that do have a cluster or an outbreak. Our finance section is working with grant applications and FEMA reporting. They really share information with us and our first responder group, so we can make sure that information gets to everyone through either the first responders or the MAC group. Our planning section, as I talked about, they're helping us to be forward looking. Right now they're working on recovery. They're working with Mavita and also the Chamber of Commerce as advisors, telling them what's going on from the Department of Health and also from the Unified Area Command, giving that information to our business owners and operators so they can make smart decisions about reopening. Our logistics section is by far one of the most busier sections that we have. We were given a tier system from the state. So a lot of our PPE that we receive is coming from state resources, and they ask us to use a tier system. So there are 5 tiers. The first one is acute care hospitals, EMS and first responders, and testing and surveillance for Department of Health. Tier 2 is our skilled nursing facilities, or SNFs, as you may hear them called, and our long-term care facilities. Anything that has a positive test in it will go up to a tier 2 or tier 1 from those groups. Tier 3 are those businesses or offices identified in phase 1 as being medical, clinical, and essential businesses. Tier 4 are those businesses that opened up in phase 2. And then tier 5 is any other clinical business. So that's the guidance we received from the state, how our logistics section has been filling orders. We received hundreds of requests that we've been trying to fill through that group as we receive PPE. As you heard early on in the media, N95 masks were nearly impossible to get for a section of time, as well as now, it's probably a little less covered, is nitrile examination gloves. Those are also in scarce supply. Some of the requests that we received along the way, we have not been able to fill because they haven't done the proper reporting, or we've had businesses that have over requested. So you may have somebody who only has a contact with a few people a week requesting something like 2,000 or 3,000 gloves. We do provide supplies to reach goals of having either a 14-day or 30-day supply, depending on your tier level, to make sure that you can operate. To see what we distributed so far, you can see we sent over 3,095 masks, over 36,000 surgical masks. The cloth masks that are available through LCPD, LCFD, and DASO, those cloth masks, a lot of those came through the EOC, over 35,000 of them. Face shields, gowns, hand sanitizer, gloves, and latex gloves. Those have all been supplied from Area Command. So very busy section there. So what's coming up for our Unified Area Command? We are entering the end of one incident action plan. We have a 2-week plan. So every 2 weeks, we go through the process of updating that and seeing what we're going to be working on. One thing we're going to focus on is our vulnerable populations with this new resource from the state, from the Secretary for Aging and Long-Term Care, trying to get some education and training on the steps that they're proposing to those centers, those SNFs, so that we can start doing some of that locally. Really building on the efforts of Lieutenant Daines and all the 40 groups that she's reached out to, also including the Hospitality Coalition. We're going to work on filling the gaps in PPE requests and receipts, make sure we circle back and follow up with any organization that hasn't received what they need. Right now, I can tell you the number of requests we have been receiving has really dropped off. So there's only a few coming in a day. Most people are at that 30-day level of supply. So that's really where we want people to be. We're going to provide assistance to those recovery groups so that they can get information from the Department of Health and what we're seeing in our community with first responders and the spread of coronavirus. Keep supporting the external surveillance testing and case investigation through DOH, and then continued communication with our regional hospitals. So with that, I know it was a lot of information pretty quick, so I can circle back and answer any questions, I hope.
Thanks, DC Smith. Let's see here. Counselor Vasquez, did you have any questions?
No, I didn't.
No?
I'm putting my hand down.
Okay. Counselor Beta-Stuvi?
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to say thank you, Deputy Chief Smith, for this level of detail. It's a lot of the stuff that I've been working for, and you actually answered most of my questions that I had through your presentation. And I also wanted to thank you. I've heard good things about yourself and your leadership with some of our community partners. And so I just wanted for that to be known as well. So thank you so much for this. I'm obviously very interested to making sure that we are seeing good capacity in all the areas, that we have enough supplies, that our hospitals, don't become overwhelmed with their systems, and so that we can move in somewhat a stable range, considering, like you said, this is going to be a long-term event that we have to stay planned for and know that we're going to see upticks. I think some of the cases that we've seen as of recently probably can be attributed to graduation, Memorial Day. Once we open, have different opening levels, we're going to probably in 2 weeks or a week or so start to see more cases. Maybe not, that is the hope, but I just want to make sure that we're staying level. For one of the items, and maybe you can help me, if we are trying to request resources at the state level, does that go through your department, or is that through OEM that makes those types of requests?
So currently for City of Las Cruces, other departments who need PPE, those requests are coming through the fire department, and Battalion Chief Mike Daniels is filling those requests. We also send those requests, kind of combine them all together, and we send them up to the Unified Area Command Logistics section to be filled.
Okay.
We also are reaching out to buy our own supplies for the city.
And one of the things that I know I talked about, probably looking at the time log from Mr. Combs provided, but I know for sure I said it on March 30th. I may have even mentioned it on the March 2nd, that of having testing capabilities here in Las Cruces. Was that something that his department would have been able to reach up and start working on? How would that process have worked with the OEM?
With that, we're partnered with the Department of Health, and when you look at a pandemic response and the plan that we had to work on, we're in line with DOH. We wouldn't be doing an offshoot and setting up outside testing outside of that chain of command. Part of the ICS structure is to keep things in line so there's no duplication. With that, though, you can see our support through Department of Health through that branch for testing is providing resources in the ways of people, traffic control, PPE, so that they can expand their capacity.
Okay. So the OEM itself, they don't necessarily ask for those types of resources?
Our area command for this area will also send up a 213 to the state level, and we can communicate those needs up to the state level through that chain of command. So we're just one area of a very large, what you can see for our ICS structure is repeated throughout 6 regions in the state of New Mexico. So we send those requests up as well.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. And thank you again for this presentation.
Welcome.
Okay. Let's see. Counselor Sorg, did you have a question?
Not about that presentation, no.
Okay, DC Smith, looks like you're done. We appreciate it very much. We appreciate your service and all that you all have been doing these last few months. So thank you very much for that. So let's go back to Natalie Green, and I'll start with that particular lineup. We had Counselor Vasquez, Beta-Stuvi, and Counselor Sorg. Thank you for letting me interrupt and move to this and then back to Natalie. So Councilor Vasquez, did you have questions for Natalie?
No, I just wanted to make a quick comment on the small businesses, the local restaurants. I know that there's some, local franchises that are owned by local folks, but franchises really are opportunities for people with wealth already to buy into. In fact, I was looking at what a franchise for Wendy's costs, and it's $500,000 in liquid assets and $1 million of net worth. Dunkin' Donuts is 1.5 million in net worth and 750,000 of cash reserves. So I just wanted to make that point in terms of the locally owned small businesses, right? I think you look at it like locally owned Mexican restaurant versus a franchisee of a bigger corporate chain, and I think who we're helping is significantly different. It's not all equal, even though they're locally owned. So I just wanted to make that point because to me it does make a difference in terms of who we're helping with taxpayer money.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Vasquez. I don't know if we could make that a criteria that it only go to non-franchise restaurants. I don't know if Jennifer, let me see if Jennifer's here. Looks like she is. Jennifer, is that something that if we were to do a second round that you could focus on non-franchise restaurants?
There's a possibility. We would have to very clearly define it. I have to look into that. I don't know,
okay.
But definitely do that.
Yeah, I'd hate to kind of discriminate theoretically. I hear what you're saying, Councilor Vasquez. I really do. I just I don't know. Let's let Jennifer look into that. So
okay, thank you.
Those comments.
Thank you.
Councilor Betastubi, you were next in line on for Natalie Green back when we had Natalie. Did you have anything you'd like to add?
My question, it was part of the second portion of the presentation actually was for Amy Bassford.
Oh, okay.
And it was, looking at my notes here, when we were going over the financials of what we might expect back from perhaps state money, there was the COVID impact allocation. We saw that some areas have been able to use it just in scenario planning. If there is a change in our situation and is there an opportunity to become eligible for that type of help later on? Or is this sort of a one-time event?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilor Betastubi, Amy Johnson Bassford, Grants Administrator. I believe that these are determinations that are made by the state for the initial $1.25 billion that was provided to them. So I don't believe that we would receive anything through this particular one. However, should our issues change here, any future ones, we may be able to see that same kind of funding provided by the state that they are providing to, say, Farmington and Gallup, where they have, really huge numbers of cases that they're experiencing.
Thank you. I'm very much hoping we don't ever have to use that, but just making sure. So thank you very much, Amy. And Mayor, that's all I had.
Okay, thanks. And last but not least, Councilor Sorg.
Yes, thank you so much, Mayor. Several of the things that we've been talking about, but I want to start with thanking Councilor Vasquez for looking up those numbers and the types of restaurants. That's I had a hint that it was what was happening, but that really helps us understand. We have a local preference on RFPs anyway. That's a standard practice in the city that local businesses do get preferences. And of course, there's different kinds of businesses that might change that preference in some way, but it's there. And so it would not be something new. But just to follow up on the poverty thing that we were discussing earlier, Mayor, if you recall, about 4 or 5 years ago, you actually stated in City Council that poverty was going to be one of our #1 priorities to try to address.
Sure.
And I know we've made some attempts, but again, we need to have it looked at again and redo our efforts And our direct support for those that are in that group of people has to be increased, I believe, too, as we have mentioned earlier in the meeting today. But I'd like to emphasize the fact that to have long range support, we have to have education, when specifically as the city's concerned, training for people to get into higher paying jobs. And along with that, they have to have housing. We are desperately short on affordable housing. But then finally, the overall economic development. And I go back to what our presentation was a couple of weeks ago on our economics here and support for building more economic-based jobs. That brings in new money, and that new money gets spread around to everybody probably, but a lot of it goes to the poverty people too. And of course, the emphasis on income equality. That is the ultimate goal here, is to have more income equality. So those are the things I think we should be emphasizing as we go forward in time. Just remember, it's not just a Las Cruces problem. It's a problem all over the state and in the nation too. So got to have efforts from everywhere. And we have to have people that will support that effort everywhere. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a couple questions for Natalie. So is Families and Youth the only nonprofit that can provide, that the city can work with to provide these type of meals? Or is there one of the others, like, I don't know, Community Action Agency or one of the others? I mean, is FYI the only one that we could give monies to, and then they go out and get meals or work with the community on that?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the reason we work with FYI is because they do the summer food program. So they get direct reimbursement from the federal government for those meals for children under the age of 18. So it was a natural extension that if we're feeding the kids, it's very likely that we probably need to feed those adults that are taking them to those meal programs. So that's the reason we picked them. Again, it was an extension of the mayor's meal program. So we would have to do a little more research with legal to see how we would structure a different program. And again, our contract is with FYI, and FYI does the procurement process. So it's their process, but we could add or request that we put some additional conditions on their procurement process.
Okay, so let's say we wanted to do round 2 and not use any of the restaurants that were in round 1. And the second thing is, I specifically, when I put forth the original, those meals weren't $10. They were smaller. They were less cost, and I wanted it spread out a little bit to more restaurants. That's one question. The second question is, keep in mind that, and I love these 2 restaurants. One was La Posta, and the other one was are the Vinos? No, the one with the doghouse. Great green chili enchiladas over there, but they're both in Mesilla, and I didn't think that we're going to use city funds for Mesilla restaurants. So that's why I thought if we do a round 2, it's strictly Las Cruces restaurants, and then of course Jennifer's going to check to see if there can be a distinction between franchise restaurants versus mom and pop, so to speak, quote. And second, a $7.50 meal, because that means more meals, which means more restaurants can be done, like 20 instead of 10, or even go down to $5. I mean, we're not talking a gourmet meal here, just something that we could do. And so, but that's up to council if they want to go around 2. But I think if we did a round 2, might want to look at something like that. So you're thinking that obviously we already have this agreement with families and youth, but that if we wanted to do a different one, you'd have to research that a little bit.
Mr. Mayor, I'll do a little research and get with legal. Ultimately, the benefit is to the household. So we are serving residents within city limits. I believe FYI chose a variety of restaurants based on location, right? A lot of times we talk about access to resources across the city. So they wanted to do an even distribution in different areas. So someone's not having to drive all the way across town to get.
La Posta is kind of far, but okay, that's fine. Let's look. Can we look? Well, I got to check with council here first if they want to go another round too, and if so, we're going to change the parameters a bit. But anyways, okay. If you can stand by, it looks like we're starting to get some questions in. So, Councilor Bencomo, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I remember sort of having this conversation, and I don't necessarily remember us setting up any parameters as council. We did. I do not remember that. But I feel like I hadn't even noticed, and it's true. I think Messia, I mean, that's, one of the reasons, a lot of you all pushed back on a slower reopening was because some of these other communities were doing different things. And so, if we're going to put city resources towards supporting local business in this moment, then they should be within city limits. And then I think I'd be curious. Yeah, I think I would be interested in if we do a second round and going back to look at some of those things for sure.
Okay, and I'm not suggesting that the town of Mesilla come up with money. We recognize that their budgets are such that they're so tied into tourism, and it's a challenge. I've heard Mayor Barraza talk on our mayor's meetings about how they're going to be challenged here, and we're very fortunate here at the City of Las Cruces, and I know you all get them. I see the emails. We get emails from a lot of people saying, when are we going to do our budget cuts? When are we going to do all these changes that a lot of these other cities are doing? Well, thank goodness, I don't believe we're going to have to really go to that in that direction. And that's many thanks to our management team, our finance team, you all in the city council for being able to recognize that it's good to have money on hand and reserves and such. So that's a good thing. So.
And Mr. Mayor, I'd also like to understand the outreach process for how we got this information out to restaurants to be able to apply. Just from looking at that list of 10, it seems like some pretty big restaurant players are on that list. And I would really like to make sure that the little guy gets access to some of these funds. So.
No, rightfully so. I think that's good. I don't know the process either. All I know is that we've discussed this. It's been in various media sources. You would think that everybody reads the Las Cruces Sun News. You would think that, but there's all different other media sources that are out there, and so I couldn't tell you. I don't know how that was advertised. Councilor Sorg.
I would just that I think only one of the top 5 restaurants for the best chili cheeseburger in town was on that list. I think another 1 or 2 would be good.
Hey, let me tell you something. I've eaten Jake's Hamburgers or Jake's Kitchen or Cafe. They've got some pretty good hamburgers there. Just make sure your cholesterol is in a decent number before you go eat it, because it'll definitely go up. But they're definitely worth a run around the track a few times if you want to eat it. Okay, I guess that's it. For the questions. Looks like we may finish before noon. So if there's nothing further, is that it, David? We've got pretty much everything covered. David Maestas.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, that covers the topics we had today, and we will do research on the restaurants. That way we can let you know what opportunities and availabilities we have before we move forward on the next step.
Yeah, if we go with another round two.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, if there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Gondara was the motion, and who seconds?
Councilor Flores.
Oh, Councilor Flores, hadn't heard from you, like a little wallflower back there. Okay, motion and second, we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Bye.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. It's 11:40 PM. Have a good, safe weekend. Talk to you all later.
Thank you. You do the same, Mayor.